Thank you, Matt. Thanks, Marine Money. I have a lot to cover in what I thought was 20 minutes. So I'm planning to go at breakneck speed. I have a slideshow that is quite dense, which I'm not going to go through all of. It was really meant as a resource for all of you. But if you have questions later, I don't think there's going to be room at the end. I'm around all day. So let's quickly look at a timeline of key events related to the Russian oil price cap. On June 3rd, 2022, the EU passed its sixth sanctions package, which included a prohibition on EU operators to carry crude oil or petroleum products from Russia beginning December 5th, 2022. That better? December 5th, 2022 for crude, and February 5, 2023 for products. I'm not an EU lawyer, but I'm going to talk mostly about U.S. law, but I'm going to touch on the EU as well. On September 2nd of this year, the G7 issued a statement announcing a price cap and a maritime services ban beginning on those same dates, with an exception to that ban for carriage of cargo below the price cap. On September 9th, OFAC issued preliminary guidance on the implementation of the maritime services ban. Most of that's mostly what we're going to talk about. And on September 29th, the EU proposed its eighth sanctions package with respect to Russia, and just last week that package was passed, and it will mark the beginning of the implementation of the price cap within the EU. So the EU and the US are moving together, but not precisely in lockstep. Going back to the June 3rd sixth package of measures against Russia, the package included a prohibition on the direct or indirect purchase, import, or transfer into the EU of crude oil or petroleum products originating in Russia or being exported from Russia. The package also prohibits EU operators from insuring and financing the transport of such goods to third countries. The ban on the importation of crude goes into effect December 5th. The ban on products, February 5th. And while the ban on importing Russian oil remains, same is true in the U.S., there is an exception for carriage under the cap. The goals of this program are contradictory, at least to me: to reduce upward price pressure, to reduce Russian oil revenue, and to maintain supply. This is vastly more complex than prior sanctions regimes by either the U.S. or the EU, and is going to be complicated both to implement as well as to enforce. The G7 envisioned that the implementation of the price cap would be based on what's called a record-keeping and attestation model, and aims to ensure consistent implementation across jurisdictions. We're going to have to see about that. The goal of the record-keeping and attestation model is to limit possibilities for circumventing the cap regime, while also maximizing or minimizing the administrative burden on market participants. I think actually it is maximizing the administrative burden. That burden is going to be high. On September 9th, OFAC issued its preliminary guidance of the implementation of the Maritime Services Policy, and the preliminary guidance, which is supposed to be supplemented by further guidance, and the December 5th deadline is right around the corner. We don't have that guidance yet. It provided notice to market participants of the impending ban on services, with the exception under the cap. And has the same dates, December 5th and February 5th, as the EU. Who knows what's going to happen? December 5th is around the corner. Ships are being fixed now for around that time frame. So we'll see if we get any kind of formal guidance in time to really get this going. On September 9th, OFAC announced that the implementation of the price exception will rely on the same record-keeping and attestation process that will allow each party in the supply chain to demonstrate that the oil that they're carrying was purchased under the cap. The record-keeping and attestation process is in addition to standard sanctions due diligence, which is expected of companies in the market. We're going to get into detail on that. I forgot to advance the slides. Okay, OFAC confirmed that the record-keeping and attestation process is designed to create a safe harbor for service providers, participants in this industry, from liability for breach of sanctions where service providers inadvertently deal with the purchase of seaborne Russian oil above the cap due, for example, to falsified records. You have to be careful to see that records have not been phonied up. Did you do your underlying due diligence? Did you receive an appropriate attestation? Well, we don't yet know what an attestation looks like. OFAC has not provided guidance. Is that a single piece of paper that says the purchase of the oil was at or below the cap, or is it something more? I expect it's going to be something more, but we don't know yet. As part of its preliminary guidance, OFAC has published different types of record-keeping and attestation requirements in what's called a tiered system. OFAC has published a rubric that identifies Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 for actors who have different levels of access to price information. Tier 1 actors. Tier 1 actors are those persons who regularly have direct access to price information in the ordinary course of business. This is refiners, importers, commodities brokers, traders and customs brokers, people in the trade. Tier 1 actors need to retain and share as needed documents that show that seaborne Russian oil was purchased at or below the cap, and may need to provide these attestations to Tier 2 or Tier 3 actors. Documentation may include invoices, contracts, and receipts, and the like. Okay, for those in the room, Tier 2 actors. Tier 2 actors are those persons who sometimes able to request and receive price information from their customers in the ordinary course of business, such as financial institutions providing trade finance, or as OFAC says, shippers. And they've misused the term, but by shippers they mean participants in the shipping business. Tier 2 actors should, when practicable, request, retain, and share as needed price information or attestations from the Tier 1 actors, the people who have direct information, price information in the ordinary course of business. Documentation, again, includes invoices, contracts, receipts, and so forth. Now, I led a panel just 2 weeks ago where I had representatives of both the State Department and OFAC on the panel. They say that they want to make this easy for the industry, that this is not going to be a game of playing gotcha by OFAC. We'll see about that. They want to have a conversation with the industry. So if you want to get guidance from OFAC, they say that they will try to get it to you now in a timely fashion. But they still couldn't answer the question about what an attestation looks like that could be reasonably relied on by you, the ocean carriers. I had a case years ago where I had a banking client that had relied on a one-page financial statement given by a guarantor. They went to court on the guarantee and said that the financial statement was fraudulent. And the court said, yes, it was in fact so fraudulent that you had no right to reasonably rely on it. That was a one-page document. Is an attestation a sentence? Is it a paragraph? Is it supported by underlying documentation? We don't know the answer to that yet. Tier 3 actors. Tier 3 actors are those persons who do not regularly have direct access to price information. This is primarily the insurance industry. It includes insurance brokers, insurers, reinsurers, and P&I clubs. Tier 3 actors should obtain and retain customer information from Tier 1 or Tier 2 actors. The idea being essentially that if an insurance company is going to renew your coverage, there's going to have to be some sort of attestation that the oil you've carried, if it's of Russian origin, was carried under the cap. That likely will be an annual attestation. Records retention. OFAC has identified that whether you're in any one of the 3 tiers, you're going to have to maintain relevant documentation for 5 years. So if you have a document retention policy that's shorter than that, you're going to need to keep those records regardless. Tier 1 actors, according to OFAC, should consider updating the terms and conditions of their contracts or update their invoice structure to include an itemized price for oil that excludes shipping, freight, or customs costs. So you have to look at the FOB, CNF, CIF cost of the oil and make sure that your records show what the actual price of the oil was and whether it was at or below the cap. Tier 2 actors, that's those of you in this room, should consider providing guidance to your staff, updating requests for information on sanctions questionnaire templates, updating bill of lading templates, including counterparty attestation. So the attestation would be right in the bills. Tier 3 actors need to consider updating their policies and related terms and conditions, the P&I Club rules, basically. Importantly, the new reject and report requirement. OFAC has advised that U.S. persons in OFAC, the OFAC regs are aimed at U.S. persons, will be required to reject participating in an evasive transaction or a transaction that violates the ban and the cap, and then report such a transaction to OFAC. So simply not doing the business is not enough. What that reporting requirement will be like and what the timing will be, we don't know yet. OFAC recognizes that not every service provider may have access to all information. OFAC recommends that service providers review information available to them for potential red flags. So what are the red flags for evasion? Evidence of deceptive shipping practices, which is there's a whole host of OFAC deceptive shipping practices that I'll get to in a second. Refusal or reluctance to provide requested price information, unusually favorable payment terms, inflated costs, or insistence on using circuitous or opaque payment mechanisms. Nobody's ever seen that in this business. Indications of manipulated shipping documentation. Are the documents phonied up? Is that obvious to you? Newly formed companies. If you've been dealing with an old customer, then all of a sudden they have a new sub you're dealing with and it's registered in some foreign and strange jurisdiction. Abnormal shipping routes, things like that. Enforcement of the price cap is going to be an international effort. Actors in the maritime services supply chain who falsify documentation are going to be subject to enforcement. Actors in the maritime services supply chain who do not implement OFAC's guidance and who recklessly deal in Russian oil are subject to enforcement. This is much more complex than prior sanctions regimes, which are as simple as don't do business with that actor, don't do business with that country. Here you have a mix of countervailing goals and a very complicated implementation process. OFAC promises vigorous enforcement, even though they said out loud 2 weeks ago that it's not going to be a gotcha game, but it's going to be strongly enforced. OFAC and its regs are aimed at U.S. persons. U.S. persons are subject to the maritime services ban and will need to address the record-keeping and attestation requirements. But non-U.S. actors are captured by this regime as well. Secondary sanctions, and again, we don't have the full guidance, secondary sanctions, that is OFAC sanctions against foreign companies, are not anticipated, but there could be causing liability when a foreign actor violates sanctions, then sends money in violation of sanctions through a U.S. intermediary bank, causing it to violate sanctions, could lead to liability and perhaps even designation as an SDN for that foreign actor. Two things that I recommend that you read are the 2019 guidance, which OFAC issued with respect to sanctions compliance programs that emphasize management commitment, risk assessment, internal controls, most importantly, testing, auditing, and trading. And when you go to OFAC with a possible violation, you need to show that you've got a program in place that addresses those items. And that you comply with all prior maritime guidance, which is contained in a May 2020 report. I can get these for you, or they're on the OFAC website. Everyone here needs to have a look at their compliance program. Everyone here needs to be ready for this regime. It is right around the corner. Thank you for your time. I am around all day for questions.